Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So for our next session, we have a workshop titled Getting Started with Apache Airflow, Building Your Own Workflow. And this will be by Ricardo Sueiras, who is the principal open source at Amazon Web Services. So please welcome Ricardo.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. Okay, so this is a workshop. So if you have got your laptops and you want to follow along, then you can do so. What I'll be doing is I'll be going through this. I'll be driving, and you can follow along. I'll be pausing so that you can catch up. But you can also do this when you go home as well. And there is a bit of a slideshow because part of the workshop requires downloading some containers. That takes about 10 minutes. So whilst we do that, we're going to switch out of the code and go into a presentation. When I do the presentation, there is also a QR code with a survey. If you complete the survey, there's the first 50 get a $25 AWS credit voucher as well. So if you want to do that, then you can do that. Okay. So let's get. So this is the website. So if you want to follow along, go to that website. And yeah. So when you go to that website, it's a GitHub repo. There is this markdown document which contains the workshop, and I'm going to follow through it every step, showing you what it looks like, and you can follow along too. So the first thing is actually we need to install some software on our machines. The workshop is going to use containers. So we're going to use Docker or another container developer tool called Finch, which AWS produced, I think it was last year. And it's like an open source developer tool that is equivalent to Docker. So you can run the same commands you do with Docker, but it's an open source, the NCF project. So when I'm running through this, I'll be using Finch, but equally it will work as well with Docker. Now, one thing I realized when I was doing the workshop is that I've tested it on Linux and I've tested it on Mac. I haven't tested it on Windows. So there is a file here which should work for anyone who wants to follow along with Windows. Unfortunately, I haven't tested it because I don't have a Windows machine. So if anyone is following along with Windows and it doesn't work, please come and see me and help me fix it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through, because I think learning Apache Airflow is best done by actually going through an example. So I'm going to go through a very simple hello world example, and then we're going to build what I call the ultimate joke repository, because who doesn't like jokes? I mean, I don't know about you, but I am absolutely crazy about jokes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to build a repository that will allow us to use Apache Airflow to create the tasks needed to capture jokes on a day-to-day basis and store them in our mega joke repository, which is going to be stored on a Postgres database. So this is what we're going to build. And so the first step is actually checking out the repository. So I'm going to just keep switching between this and my VS Code. If you've got another IDE, you can use that as well. Right. So I've already got one, but I'm gonna just so that I can do this and show it's actually working for real. We're gonna actually do it live. So I'm now gonna hope and pray to the Wi-Fi gods that they're not gonna let me down. And obviously, if you're doing this as well, you can sort of like download the repo at the same time. So now we have our repo. And so we've got two directories. All the slides that we're going to be showing later on are here as well, so you can actually grab them as well. And then we've actually got the code. So the code is actually here on the left-hand side. So the first thing is we're going to use this project that AWS kind of launched a couple of years ago called Moi Local Runner. And it's one of the easiest ways to get started with Apache Airflow. So like I mentioned, the dependencies for running this is literally Docker, Docker Compose if you want to run Docker, or just Finch if you want to run Finch. Now, if you're on the repo, you can actually click on Finch. Actually, I'll just do it here. Where is it? And it will walk you through how to install it and how to get started. But if you've already got Docker, then I suggest you just stick with Docker for the moment, and then you can experiment with Finch afterwards. So the next thing we're going to do is create a new Python environment. I've already done that. So I've got it here. Where is it? So now I've switched into my virtual environment. So the instructions on how to do that are there. So I've called mine FOSSASIA, but in the workshop it says Airflow. And now I've already cloned the repo into live. And if I do tree, you can see we've got all the files that are in the repo. Now, when we use the Apache Airflow project while local runner, there are a number of key configuration files that allow us to change and configure Apache Airflow. I'm not going to change any of them here because they're already configured correctly, but I've put in the workshop the details of the key configuration files in case you want to configure and customize it for your own needs. Specifically, the one that you might want to customize is the REST API one, because by default it's disabled, but sometimes if you want to use the Airflow API, you'll need that enabled, and so I share how you can do that. Because we're using Docker, there are a number of Docker configuration files. So we have the Docker build file here, which you can review to see what the base of images are and all that kind of stuff. And then we've actually got the Docker Compose file that shows what Docker images we're going to be using. And there are two we're going to be using. One is Postgres, because Apache Airflow requires a database, and we're going to be using Postgres. Another one is then the base Airflow image, which is called Moi Local, which is maintained in the AWS repo. Now, when we're running these containers, we interact with Apache Airflow is we mount a number of volumes from our local machine to that running container. And you will see later on what these do, but this is what we're configuring here. Now, to actually start the process, what we do is we run a script. And this script is here. This is the Windows one I was talking about. So I hope it's going to work for those people who are following along with Windows. But what we do to run it is we literally run the command. And if we run it without any command line parameters, it gives us the option. And then if we run with the build parameter, then it's going to go away and start building the repository. And what I've got here is actually the process of doing that. Now, at this point, is anyone following along? Yeah, okay, cool. Right, so this is going to take about 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch out of the workshop mode and go into presentation mode and try and give some theory about Apache Airflow so that we use the time effectively. So let's go back to here. Right, so Apache Airflow. Can you put your hand up if you've heard of Apache Airflow, the project? Okay, a few. Okay, right, so good. For the rest of you that don't know about it, I'm going to give a brief history into Apache Airflow. So I've been working in open source for about 20 years, and one of the things that I love about open source is how developers come together to scratch an itch. So they have a problem and they want to solve it with software. And in 2014, 2015, the data engineers at Airbnb were having problems with how to manage the various tasks in building their data pipelines. So like all good developers, what they did is they created a solution to solve this problem. And that solution ended up becoming the first version of Apache Airflow. And it was open sourced, I think, in 2016. And so that's kind of the origins. It was designed by developers to solve a specific problem, which is how do you take all the tasks that you need to do your data engineering and orchestrate them in a more effective way. And so it brings this kind of this term called orchestration. And what we mean by orchestration in Apache Airflow is how do you coordinate a workflow and all the tasks needed in a way that allows you to manage it in an effective way at scale. So if you think about the key point of Airflow is that it's a workflow orchestrator, and a workflow is a collection of tasks that you have to do a job. And we describe Airflow workflows in Python code. So this is a very simple example. And we use some of the Airflow classes to define a workflow, which we'll see when we come in to do the hands-on bit. And each workflow has what's called a unique ID, a DAG ID. So a workflow isn't a workflow unless we have tasks that we want to orchestrate. So in the example we're going to look at later, building a joke repository, we have 3 tasks, which is 1, to build the database, 2nd task to get the jokes, and the 3rd one to put the jokes in the database. So any workflow you have, you can break down into tasks. And like a workflow, each task is defined by a unique ID. Now, Airflow uses a thing called operators to make your life as a data engineer really easy. So as you're building your workflows and you're identifying tasks and creating tasks, what operators allow you to do is, rather than have to know the deep internals of connecting to all the various systems, such as your databases or your AWS environment, operators take configuration items. You provide the configuration items, and then it does everything else for you. So you no longer have to be an expert in, say, for example, how to interact with Amazon Redshift. Or if you want to store data in MariaDB, you can use the MariaDB operator to connect easily to MariaDB without having to be a MariaDB expert. In addition, there are special operators within Apache Airflow that allow you to store connection strings and passwords, which means that as a data engineer, I no longer now have to worry about how to connect to my services or managing the credentials, because they could be managed by the security team or the operations team, and I just get told this is how you connect. And we'll see that when we do the joke demo. Now, one of the beauties about Apache Airflow and why it's so popular is that over the last few years, thousands of open source developers have joined the community, and they've created hundreds of operators. And if you look at this list here, the systems that you work in, day out, are probably on that list. And these simplify how you build your tasks and your workflows. And because it's open source, of course, it means you can use your own, you can create your own ones. You can either fork the existing ones to customize them for your own needs, or if you have a new system, you can build your own. And this is super powerful. And one of the reasons I think that Airflow has become so popular, because of this extensibility in how you can plug in easily new operators to connect to different systems. And so what Airflow allows you to do is take those tasks that you have that are using operators and then put them together into a workflow. And this is kind of what it looks like. You know, you define your specific tasks, but you have to figure out, okay, there's a relationship, there's a graph of how your workflow starts. So it starts with one task, it might fork into multiple branches, but you define using Python language that relationship. So either using the greater than or less than sign, or the set downstream or set upstream. So again, this is all happening in a Python file. Now, once you have your workflow and your tasks in your Python file, then you need to know what to do with it, right? So I'm going to cover very quickly kind of the architectural concepts of Apache Airflow. Now, to deploy your workflow in Apache Airflow, it's as simple as just copying that Python file you've created into a special directory that's called the Apache DAGs directory, and that's it. So it's really, really simple, and we'll see that when we go into the kind of demo bit later on. So once Apache Airflow has seen a workflow file, a DAG they're called, in that DAGs folder, then it needs to understand what tasks are in that file. And it then needs to understand, okay, so I've got some tasks in this file. I need to know now how to run these. And that is the job of the scheduler and the executor. The scheduler will take the workflow, will break it down into tasks, and then we'll figure out what needs to be run when, and then it will hand it over to an executor, and the executor will then pass it on to a worker, and then the worker will execute the task. Now, the important thing here is that these are done in a stateless way, right? So if I have a task that writes a file to /temp, the second task can't read the file from /temp because there's no guarantee that worker is going to be on the same node. If you have a multi-node system, if you've got a one-node system, then it probably will be. But most production systems are, multi-node. So you have to treat your tasks as stateless. But we'll come into how Airflow manages state between tasks later on. So how do we know, or how does Airflow know when to schedule these workflows? Well, we define that in Python as a property of the workflow. That in this yellow, we can see schedule interval. Now, at the moment, it's set to none, but this value takes a cron tab input, which we can see on the bottom left, and we can configure our workflow to run as we would any cron job. Now, for some people, that cron tab is not flexible enough. So the Airflow community created a number of different options called, for example, timetables that allow you to define custom timetables, which you can also schedule your workflows. So it's really super flexible. Once you've created your workflow and you've defined when you want to run it, it's really super flexible how you manage that. Now, one of the biggest challenges that people have when they first start working with Apache Airflow is understanding how it actually manages workflows when you submit them to the system, Airflow, to run. Now, Airflow has this concept of start date, and you define that within your workflow, and we'll see that in the code later on. And so when you create your workflow, you define your start date, and when you submit your workflow on a schedule, the scheduler will use that start date as the beginning of when it's going to start processing and kicking off tasks to run it. So if my start date, as in this example here, is 2022, and my schedule is once a day, it's going to run over 700 tasks before it gets to today's task, right? Because I've scheduled this 2 years ago. So that's something that people, when they first get to grips with Airflow, struggle to understand. But you can disable that behavior. Here it's enabled by true, but you can set catch-up equals false to disable that. But it's also one of the big, I think one of the most powerful features of Apache Airflow. Now, when Apache Airflow is running these tasks, it's run by an executor. There are different executors available. The most common one is a Celery one, but there is also a Kubernetes executor, which allows you to create these tasks on a pod somewhere. And it's up to you to configure that if you want to self-manage Apache Airflow. But what I find these days is more and more people are using managed services because it's quite a big task to manage very large Apache Airflow environments. Now, one of the concepts that we have to be very, very careful of when we're building and designing our workflows is this concept of idempotency, which is a very difficult word for me to say. But idempotency is where when you define some code, every time you run the code, it always gives you the same output. And this is really important because if you're running workflows against your data, you don't want to provide, or you don't want to get different data results every time you run your workflow. And so typically what happens is that you will use key values that Airflow provides around date. So the start of a workflow, the end of a workflow, and you use that in your code to define the start and end of when you're, for example, doing a select query. And that will mean that every time you run your workflow, your task, it will always bring back the same results. And this is an example of what it actually looks like in reality. Now, there's a database in Apache Airflow called the Meta Store. And this is how Apache Airflow stores all its information about the tasks and the workflows, whether they ran successfully, whether they failed. And it also is used by Airflow to manage states between tasks. Within Apache Airflow, there's a thing called XCOM, and you can push and pull, data to the database, which means that you can read from the meta database. So if I'm running a task, I can put something onto that database, and then the subsequent task can read from it. Now, there are some limitations. It's not optimized for big payloads, so there are some good practices that you should follow. But for managing things like queries or IDs of state or the location of a file, it's perfect. And then kind of the final piece of Airflow is actually the UI. And this is one of the reasons why I think Airflow initially was very popular, is because when you're creating workflows with these tasks, the old way of running cron tabs was terrible, right? It was really difficult to know and manage all the different crons you were running. You didn't know, for example, whether they were successful. And as we'll see when we dive into the Airflow UI, it's actually very, very nice. Right, so that is enough theory. I don't know if you're building the workflow container down there. Has it finished yet? So it's still doing it, right? And I think I've been more than 10 minutes. I think. So I'm gonna, just for the purposes of time, because I don't want to run out of time. I'm gonna continue. Is anyone else following along? Put their hands up. Okay. Are you still pulling down the containers? Okay. All right. Sorry? It's asking for a password. Oh, the password. The password we'll need later on. So don't worry, I'll give you the password when we get to that stage. It's just finished, has it? Okay, so you're back to the command prompt. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to use you as my benchmark. So we've got one person, and we're going to go back to actually now the overview. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off with a very basic hello world, starting Apache Airflow, stopping Apache Airflow, just to kind of ease into before we actually build something. So once we've actually followed the process to build our image, we can actually start it using the same command. So rather than using the build image command, which we ran, we can use the same command and start it. So I'm going to actually do that here. So this should, if all goes well, start running. And it shouldn't take very long to finish. But what it's doing is, as it's starting, because these are two containers, it's downloading any dependencies it has. And it does that every single time. So typical things like Python libraries, it will do this every single time. And obviously I'm competing with everyone else now. So it's taking a bit longer to run. So there you go, it's doing it. So whilst this is running, one of the things that as you start building your workflows, you need to optimize the kind of libraries that you're running. So some people, what they do is they bake these into the core images to make this kind of startup a lot quicker. Right. So it's actually finished now, and this is the proof in the pudding, whether it actually now works. once the container image is started, we should be, famous last words, we should be able to access it on localhost. Oh, look at that, it worked. Although I'm going to log out, because obviously it remember me. What will happen is when you go onto it for the first time, it will actually just come up with a login prompt. So I'm not sure if you got that. Right, okay, so the details are admin and test. So not super secure, but this is only demo test. And in the repo, I tell you how to configure that in one of the configuration files. So once we log in, we can see that, interesting. Why? We're in the UI and there's nothing there, although it says there's 3 there, so I'm not sure what's going on here. I think what the issue is that because I developed the workshop on my laptop, the database is still on here. So you probably are not seeing anything. Yeah, so okay, so that's okay, it's not a problem. Right, so we've started Apache Airflow. Oops. And again, in the workshop, I've provided instructions on how to start that and the kind of input and output you'll expect to see. And then when you access localhost, you'll see that. So far, we're looking good. So we're now going to create our first workflow. And in the actual repo, there is a directory called workflow. And within the workflow, in the dev dags, there are a bunch of examples, okay? So these are finished examples that work, but we're kind of like, we'll work off new ones. But what we're going to do is we're going to open the Hello World one, just so we can explore it. So this is probably the simplest Apache Airflow workflow, which has one task. Every Apache Airflow workflow will always start off by importing the DAG class. And typically, it will also import a date utils. And the reason for that is when we actually create our object, our workflow object, we provide a unique ID, and we also have to specify a start date. And so this is the reason why we have the date. And you can use different Python date libraries if you prefer. I just happen to use this one. In this specific example, I'm using one of the operators that Airflow has, which is called the bash operator. And the bash operator allows you to run bash commands. And it's very simple. And this is how all Apache Airflow operators work. You instantiate the operator with a unique name, task ID, and then the parameters for that operator. Now, every operator has different parameters. The bash one only takes 1, and that is the command you want to run. And if we look at the workshop, you can see I've kind of put more information about that and how it works. Now, one of the kind of key things when you're working with Airflow is this concept of provider packages. So with the bash operator, that's built into Airflow. But if you want to interact with other systems, they are bundled as plugins. And you will need to install these as you would Python libraries. And I have, for example, linked on the workshop where you can actually find those. And there's actually a good, if I go to, oh, not that one. Where is it? We can see here, these are what they look like. So typical Python libraries, and there are hundreds of them based on different systems that you might want to interact with. Okay, so whether you're interacting with AWS services, you'll use the Amazon provider. If you're accessing with MariaDB or MySQL, there's a MySQL one. And you can see, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's a lot, pretty much anything you want to integrate with, there'll be provider. And what we do is that if we go to a typical provider page, oh no, that's definitely not what I wanted. Let's have a look. So provider packages, this is it. So this provides you with a good way to find all the different providers. And if we go here, we can actually see where I got that list from. So if I click on Amazon, we can see the different kinds of providers that we have, for example, on AWS. And on the left-hand side, each provider has a different version. Apache Airflow is constantly innovating. So we're on, I think, version 2.8 something, coming up to 2.9. And so the provider packages are released, and there's a compatibility matrix. So you have to make sure that you're working with the version that you're running. So I'm going to change that to that version. And here I can then look at the operators, and these tell me how I can interact with AWS services. So I'm going to be interacting with S3, and so I can click on here, and now I can see examples of how I want to interact with that system. I don't need to know about S3. I don't need to know about Boto3. I can just use this to write files and read files to S3. So that's something you'll do as you start using operators to build your workflows. Now, because Python workflows are just Python files, they can use any libraries that Python files use. But one of the questions you might be thinking is, how do we actually pass those requirements onto Apache Airflow? And so what Airflow does, it manages the ones you want to create through a requirements.txt file. Just like if you're running your own Python applications, you can define the requirements and pin them to versions. But I do want for you to notice that at the top we've got a constraints file. One of the most common things we see is people breaking Apache Airflow by accident because of different issues with Python libraries conflicting with other versions against the version of Python they're running. So in order to minimize this problem, the Airflow recommend you use a constraint file. And what this means is this is a kind of known working set of pinned Python libraries. So if you, when you're writing your workflows, you try and install a later version of a Python library, what will happen is that if there's a conflict, the installation process will say, we can't do that, sorry, there's a known error. And so then you have to then make a choice whether you want to override that, you can, or whether you want to review how the versions you're running and if you can run with a compatible version. So that's something that you need to do, and it comes up very, very frequently as people move from beginning Airflow to more advanced features in Airflow and using different libraries. Those clashes are sometimes what causes Airflow to crash. So once we've got, so again, I'm skipping over the text, but this is kind of like, I'm just putting the words that are in the workshop. So now we can deploy our workflow, and it's as simple as, so let's have a look. So if I go to the workflow directory, now at the moment, ELT DAGs, I've got nothing in my DAGs folder. But if I go into my dev DAGs, I've got my hello world there. So I'm going to copy the hello world. What's going on? Dev hello world to DAGs. So I've copied it into that folder. And if the demo gods are kind to me, I hope. I'm not sure why it's not. Oh, this is not. It's not a good sign. This is not a good sign. Let's have a look. What's going on? Never do live demos, folks. Right, well, that's a mystery. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to come out of this. So do you get your, it doesn't come up for you? Oh, this is not good. It does work, I promise you. So I'm going to show you Right, so here's one I preferred earlier. Finch start. Right. So when you copy a DAG into the DAGs folder, what will happen is there's a process in Apache called the scheduler. The scheduler is what's reading that directory for new files, and it will parse the file, and then it will present it in the UI once it's there. Obviously, when it works. So what I'm doing is I'm just restarting Airflow with the version I was doing this morning, which may be the reason why it's not picking up. Right, okay. And there we go. Right, let's see if this works now. So there we go, it worked this time. So we now have our example code. If I open it, I can look at the code. Where's the code? Here. I can actually, within the actual UI, I can actually view the code of our workflow. Now, when you deploy a workflow in Airflow, you see this little button here. They're automatically disabled by default. So Airflow has a concept of pausing and unpausing. And so in order to enable it, what I can do is I can unpause it, but it's still not going to run because there is no schedule. This is not a scheduled workflow. So in order to run this, the UI, where's the UI? I can click on the trigger button. If I click on trigger, you can see the color is changing to bright green. It's now gone to dark green. Because when you run a task, there are a number of different statuses that task can be in. And they all are represented by different colors. So bright green is running, which is good. Dark green is success, which is good. Red is failed, not so good. So when we actually then we can click on a task and we can actually see the output of this task, and we can see that this bash operator just did an echo to stand it out. So we can see that task worked. It didn't do anything very interesting, but it was just to show you the basics of how it worked. So I've just walked through that. So I'm going to now just change that and modify it so that it actually runs on a schedule. And so all we have to do is go to our world, our hello world, and we can just literally change this. I'm actually updating it from the directory itself this time, so I don't have to copy it. And if I go back to the, you can now see that under the schedule, rather than it being none, I've now got every 2 minutes, this is going to run. So if I go into the, you can see that this has been run quite a few times. These all represent one time this workflow has been executed. And I only have one task, so we've got this calling FOSSASIA. If I had a number of different tasks, they would all be represented as individual lines. And each of them will have a color associated whether it was successful or not. Okay. Now, one of the things that Airflow allows you to do is create templates so that when you're creating your workflows, you don't have to hard code references. So we do this within Apache Airflow by defining variables, which here I've already created one called event, but I'm going to change this one. So the demo gods are smiling. Okay, so I've created one. So what I can do is I've actually already got the code here. I can now use one of the functionalities within Airflow to actually call in that value from the database. And there are a number of ways to do it. The one that I'm going to show you is the easiest way, which is using what's called ginger templating. So I'm going to just do that. Don't need that. Don't need that. And all we have to do is use this special format, which is 2 curly brackets, var.value, and then the name of the key in the Apache Airflow variables. And what this is going to do is the Airflow is going to go into the metas database, look for a row with the key of event, and then it's going to grab the value. So if this works, so let's copy that into nope, where? Flows. Workflow. Copy div. 2 digs. So now hopefully so what I've done, I've just copied that now into the directory, and it should hopefully come up. Please come up. Oh, the demo gods are not smiling on me today. Normally Airflow is pretty reliable, so I'm not, oh, here we go. It just took a few seconds. So now if I unpause this and look at the code, we can see it's the code that I've just worked on. So if I run this DAG, we should see it go green. And if I look at the logs, we can see that I've changed it, and you can see that the demo gods are smiling. So we've taken that value. So now we've created a workflow that's not hard-coded, and this is considered good practice. You wouldn't create workflows that are hard-coded. Right. So that's kind of that's the basics, right? So we're going to actually now create a workflow that's going to create these jokes for us. So now there is for those people who need it, there is a link, which, let's see if I can find it. I think it's, where is it? I'll put it on here. So let's have a look. Where is it? Come on. There we go. Create a link, copy link. So let's make that smaller. Now, if you open that link, I'll leave it there for a second. It's going to take you to a Word doc, and the Word doc is going to ask for a password. The password, is so that's the password. That will open the file, and in the file you'll see 2 AWS security credentials. Don't get excited. They're not going to let you do much. They're literally only going to let you copy files in one S3 bucket, and they will be disappeared tomorrow. So use it while you can. So I'll leave that there for a few seconds. So we're going to be using this as if you're following along and you want to create the joke database. So I'll come back to that in case people, or if you quickly take a picture of it now, while I then go back onto the code. So the code for this repository is all here, but it starts off with a script. So we have an original script, and this is very typical of how people start with Apache Airflow. They have a script they want to run on a scheduled basis. It's not anything to do with workflow, it's just a standard Python script. And so this script will, if I run it, script. What? Okay, worker. Okay, scripts. So if I look in here, there'll be, if I run Python, run jokes, this is hopefully going to, okay, this is fine. I was expecting this. So this is what it's doing. It's going to a API on the web. It's grabbing 10 jokes, and then it's copying them locally, and then it's going to try and save them onto S3. Now the reason why it's not working is because I don't have any credentials set. So this is why you'll need the information on here. And what we do, let me just disable this. That's disabled. From a command line, you'll need to create, if you don't have it already, a .aws. Dot is very important, it's a hidden file. And you will then create a file called credentials. And it will contain these values. I've actually put that in the Word document. Now you can't see it here because I actually have a bit of script magic that makes it invisible. Because this is a security concern. I don't want to make these available. But you'll create these in here. And now if I was to run that again, that Python script again, this time it should work. And now it's actually copied it to S3. So it's copied it to my S3 bucket. Now one thing, when you're doing it yourself, make sure that you have a unique name here, because otherwise you're just going to override my jokes. So Airflow tasks or workflows tend to start with a similar kind of story. You have something that you want to automate. In this instance, this provides a joke. If I go to my S3 bucket, which is here. Is it here? I think it is. Yeah. So there we go. We can see that that's the name of the unique name, and I did it yesterday, and here's today's, and you can see my joke file is uploaded, just so it works. So, very typical in, when we're doing workflows, we want to automate the running of this. And so in the workshop, the way I've outlined it, okay, is typically how you would approach this. Because I often get asked, okay, how do you actually start the process of creating a workflow? And the first thing really is to look at what you're trying to do. Now, in this workshop, I'm starting up let me get the Postgres. There's a local Postgres database. So let's have a look. Yeah. So I can run this command to bring my local Postgres up. Oh, that's because I'm using Finch. It would help if I was using the right thing. Okay, fine. So now I've got Postgres running in a separate container on a non-standard port, which is all outlined here. And this is where I want to store my jokes. So the first step actually is defining the tasks we want. So any workflow you're creating, you'll break it down into tasks. So here are the 3 tasks I want to do. I want to make sure that a Postgres database is available and make the tables if needed. I want to grab and run that jokes Python script, and then I want to take the files that are copied from the S3 bucket and then put them into my Postgres database. So the first task when you're creating a workflow is to figure out which are the operators I need to use, because there are so many. Now, when I went through the documentation, what I did is I thought, well, I've got a Python script I want to run, so I'm going to use a Python operator. I'm going to be interacting with and creating tables on Postgres, so I'll use the Postgres operator. And because my files are in S3 and I want to put them into Postgres, I'll use the S3 to SQL operator because it's the easiest way of moving data from an S3 bucket and ingesting it into a SQL database. So we start building our DAG. And as we've seen before, the first thing we do is we create the imports. So these are all the first 2 lines of what we had in the hello world. The next 4 are the ones I had in my joke script. And then these are the Python operators that I have to import for for the 3 operators I'm going to use. I then define the characteristics of my workflow. So I give it a unique name. I'm going to run this at 2 o'clock in the morning every day. I don't want to run this on catch up. And that's all I need to do. So I'm ready to go. So the first thing I'm going to do, the first task is creating our table. I know the jokes are created in this format, and they have type, setup, and they also have punchline. And so what I want to do is I don't really like the sound of those, so I'm going to change it, and I'm going to create a table that has 3 columns, one called category, joke category, one called the joke, and then the other one called the punchline. So if I was doing this myself, this is the kind of SQL I would run when I was connected to my database. And when we look at the operator, so if I look at the Postgres operator, we can see that it takes, where is it? It takes 2 parameters. One, which is the SQL we want to run, and then something called a Postgres con ID. So what is that, I wonder? So in Airflow, you can simplify, as I mentioned, how you connect 2 systems. So in here, I've got, I think, already configured. Postgres jokes. Here we go. So this is how I connect to my local Postgres database. And I've got the password in there, it's just hidden. But it's actually changed me. And I can actually make sure this is working by clicking on the test. And you can see it's successfully tested. So I've connected this, and it's got a name. It's called postgres.jokes, which means that when I actually write my operator, I can specify that I've got a connection called Postgres jokes, and it gets that information and knows which Postgres database to connect to. The SQL I want to run, I put into a variable, and then I create my operator, and then finally I identify the task in the workflow. So that's it. The first task in my workflow is complete. And all this will do at the moment is it will go onto my Postgres database, see if that table exists. If it does exist, it will stop. If it doesn't exist, it will finish. So I know I'm running out of time. I've got a few minutes. So the next 2 parts of the workflow do the same thing for the other 2 tasks. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy the finished one into the, let's have a look. This one here. So copy FOSSASIA. Jokes to DAGs. And hopefully this will come up quickly. So we've got it here. It's already come up. And we can see it's got 3 tasks. It's already running. Oh, gosh. It's not working. This is interesting. Right, so why is it not working? Unable to locate credentials. Okay. So this is actually what I expected. In the workflow, one of the things I talk about is if you have a workflow that's got hundreds of tasks, when one of those tasks fail, you do not want to have to rerun the whole thing. So what Airflow allows you to do is on the task you want to rerun, you can click on clear task and then it will rerun from scratch. Now what we've got to do here is I've got to stop Airflow. Oops. And I've got to change one of the configuration files to add the AWS credentials, which is here. So I'll do that now. Restart. And now when Apache Airflow starts, it's got access to those credentials. So when you're using those credentials, obviously this is development. You don't share those anywhere because these will give effectively access to your AWS environments. And when it starts again, so we have to wait for Airflow to start. It's getting quicker every time, but not quite quick enough. Okay, here we go. Because I think this is a very important thing to show, because it is one of the strengths of Apache Airflow, allowing you to stop and start your workflows based on where they failed and to carry on. So, okay, nearly there. Right. So now if I go back to here, go back to here, and click on here, and click on clear task, what will happen is it should this time work. Famous last words. You can see it's actually running. It found the credentials, it's copying it onto S3, and that worked. And now the last task is to store it in the database, and please work. We can click on that and we can see it's actually done that, and we can actually check by going to Postgres through VS Code. We can actually look at this, run a query, select star from bad jokes, execute, and we can see we've got all those bad jokes. Oops. We've got those bad jokes here in our database, and every time we ran that, it will just add more jokes to the database. So that's the if you follow the workshop, you should be able to complete that. So that's kind of pretty much the end of it. So apologies for going a bit too long. This is the QR code. If you complete the survey, you'll get a $25 AWS credit, which you can use for running Airflow in this workshop. And with that, thank you very much. Apologies for the slight hiccup at the beginning. And if you've got any questions on Apache Airflow, then I'm going to stick around if I have to get moved off. So thank you.